Okay, you're live and streaming.
Perfect. So good afternoon and welcome everyone to this open meeting of the Science and Engineering Policy Committee of the National Science Board. I'm Maureen Condick, the chair of the Committee on National S&E Policy, and Suresh Babu is our committee vice chair. We're going to start by taking roll. So please say present or here if after I call your name. Suresh Babu.
Present.
Deborah Ball. Aaron Dominguez.
Here.
Wonderful. Suresh Garamella. Dorota.
Here.
Brzezinska.
Here.
Wonderful. Mel Huff.
Here.
Matt Malkin.
Here.
Julia Phillips.
Here.
Mavi Rodriguez. Beverly Watford.
Here.
Wonderful. Do we have any other board members either on the call or on the phone today?
Kayvon Stassen here.
Wanda Ward here.
And Dan Reed.
Great. So today we have two agenda items. First, we're going to have a discussion of the detailed narrative outline and vote for the indicators report, Science and Technology, Public Perceptions, Awareness, and Information Sources. Following that vote, we'll have a committee discussion of potential National Science Board contributions to the White House Office of Science and Technology Policy's first quadrennial Science and Technology Review that's been mandated by the CHIPS and Science Act. But first, for our detailed narrative outline, Indicators is prepared under the guidance of the board by the National Center for Engineering Statistics, or NCSES, an independent federal statistical agency located within the NSF. We are glad, as always, to be working collaboratively with our wonderful NCSES colleagues. Staff has sent us an outline in the form of a draft narrative outline that summarizes the topics, the data sources, and substantive changes from the 2022 edition, if any, that the authors are anticipating. So as a reminder about this meeting, our consideration of the outline today is one of our major opportunities for NSB members to shape the content of the report. The board input and suggestions that are provided at this point in the process will have the most impact and be the most helpful to our colleagues. And we'll vote on the outline at the end of today's call. So NCSES has also shared its list of suggested reviewers. And if you have any suggestions, additions or deletions to the reviewer list, particularly if reviewers that you're aware of might cover topic areas or have specific expertise, then please email that information to either me or Suresh Babu and copy to Amanda. And we'll share your suggestions with NCSES as they finalize the reviewer list in their broader process to ensure balanced coverage of each of the report's topic areas. So following a short presentation by the report's authors, the lead reviewer, Dan Reed, will start the discussion, and we'll open up to the rest of the reviewers on the call and allow general committee discussion as well. At the end, if we have a quorum of the committee, we'll have a vote on approval of the narrative outline, subject to any input that we may give to the authors, of course. Please note that only SEP committee members can vote on approval. So does anyone have any questions before we get started? Okay, hearing none. Thank you. I'm going to turn the floor over to the report co-authors, Benjamin Schneider and Brian Southwell. The lead reviewer for this report is Dan Reed. Additional board reviewers are Deborah Ball and Beverly Watford. So Benjamin, the floor is yours.
All right, can everybody see my screen all right? Perfect, great. Well, thanks so much. I will begin with an overview of the report and discuss notable changes from the previous version. After, I will discuss each of the topics listed on the slide in more detail. The thematic report on science and technology, public perceptions, awareness, and information sources provides an update on public perceptions of science, scientists, and engineers in the United States, as well as evidence of public familiarity with scientific research processes. While other science and engineering indicators thematic reports provide an update of specific facets of science and technology, or S&T, This thematic report provides useful insight into how general audiences think about these topics, which is an important aspect of the current state of S&T. Where the 2022 report offered a refreshed vision relative to the past, the 2024 report will be largely similar to the most recent version. In continuation with the previous report, this iteration primarily relies upon several high-quality data sources to assess public perceptions of S&T. These include the Pew Research Center, the General Social Survey to a limited extent, the Wellcome Trust Global Monitor, and 3M. We also will include short sidebars featuring relevant NCSCS pilot survey data if available for the 2024 cycle. There are two notable changes from the previous report. First, the report will include a new brief section on perceptions of neurotechnology and water quality research, and will include slightly shortened passages on topics previously included, such as climate change research. Second, the sidebar on public understanding of COVID-19 research will not be included in the 2024 report. Instead, data on confidence in science before and during the COVID-19 pandemic will appear where applicable in the main narrative rather than in a sidebar. Pending availability, two new sidebars will be included in the report using data from a pilot NCSCS survey. I will now discuss the components of the report in more detail, focusing on each of the topics listed on the slide. In the first section, the report will describe public perceptions of S&T to assess Americans' overall views about science. Those views include several we have measured for many years, including the perceived promise of and reservations about S&T. We will use a variety of data sources to assess overall views about science and scientists, in addition to engineering and engineers. Also, like the previous report, this section highlights views around 4 specific S&T issues. These include perceptions related to research on artificial intelligence, robotics, and automation, environmental issues such as climate change and water quality, neurotechnology involving interfaces between computers and human brains, and STEM education. The second section will examine patterns and trends for public familiarity with scientific research process, or science S&T research processes. In this section, we will report on the understanding of the scientific process, including the logic of experimentation. This section will also describe associations between perceptions of science as a process and confidence in science, with additional indicators of scientific understanding, which reflect helpful feedback from the National Science Board on the 2022 report. This section will include a brief sidebar on public familiarity with the scientific process with data from a planned 2023 NCSCS pilot survey. Finally, the third section of the thematic report will explore Americans' reported sources of information about science and their involvement with informal science activities. Understanding where people encounter information about science offers important context for our report. This section will also include a brief sidebar featuring data from the 2023 NCSCS pilot survey and focus on science information sources. These 3 sections promise to offer a comprehensive look at how Americans perceive S&T research and researchers, what they understand about the conduct of scientific inquiry, and where they are encountering information about science. In all, the 2024 report will continue to build on enhancements from the previous report with respect to the focus on the narrative of how people think about scientific institutions and the extent to which they understand scientific research processes, rather than focusing on testing Americans' knowledge of basic scientific facts. Thank you so much, and we welcome your comments and questions on the proposed outline.
Thank you so much, Benjamin. I'd like to turn the conversation over to Dan, who will open the floor for discussion and questions.
All right. Thanks very much, Maureen. Well, first of all, thank you for that thoughtful summary. I just had a few thoughts that I want really more to be stimulation for conversation. One, as I looked at the reviewer list, I wondered if we might want to consider having adding some reviewers who might offer either an industry or a maybe more state or local government perspective, because the current reviewers are heavily weighted toward academia and policy institutes. So just a thought there about getting some broader perspective on the review process. You know, I think the quantitative aspects are really important. Let me raise the elephant in the room, which we all know. And I was thinking about this in the context of the COVID sidebar. There's a lot of and I don't know the answer to the question I'm about to pose, and I almost hesitate to even ask it, but I feel like we really should be mindful of the issue as we frame how this report is cast, which is if we learned anything from COVID, it was that scientific advice became heavily politicized. And there were real issues surrounding that, regardless of one's political perceptions or predilections. It had some interesting effects. So the question I'm a bit loath to ask is, the extent to which we believe that our society should want thoughtful scientific advice on societal issues. And is there a way to probe whether that's welcomed or not welcomed, or what context it might most be welcomed? But I think more broadly, as we look at what we know is an information-driven economy, as we think about those issues, societal understanding of science and technology, how it affects people's lives, is really critical. And I guess the thing that I also was curious, and maybe this is in the detailed analysis, is the core issue, and we also see some strong social divides around that, whether science and technology is making people's lives better or not. And there is a social divide on that topic as well. I think we all have a very strong opinion that it's in general, making people's lives better, but that's not a universally shared opinion. So those are a couple thoughts, and I realize they verge on the political, but the science, policy, and perception issues live in a very politically stratified world right now, and I think we would be naive to fail to be cognizant of that as we craft the report. So those are a few high-level thoughts as I thought about it. I do believe this report is really important because how we land messages, how messages are perceived, have huge societal effects. And so understanding where we are in a broader context, I think, is really important. So those are a few initial thoughts. And I'd invite I should not presume to do that. I will let our committee chair manage the floor, but I was going to hand it over to our other committee members, but to our other reviewers. But Maureen, back to you.
Okay, wonderful. Benjamin, did you want to make a brief response to Dan's comments, and then we'll move on to Bev and to Deborah?
Sure. So this is a good question that I know we've that's come up in the past with respect to this. I think, Brian, do you want to chime in on this a little bit? Because
I'm happy to address this. It's a great question, and I really appreciate the spirit of that. Good news is that the question of perceived value of science is one that has been asked for a while, and we are hopeful to include a couple of data points that will allow us to continue a longitudinal look at the extent to which Americans have valued the enterprise of science. And that story, despite some of the headlines, is that there does seem to be continued perception of value. Of course, there have been some conflicts and contrasts, and we, in the report, also are able to address the role of trust in science and confidence in science as it relates to various factors. Something that we don't directly address, but have consciously thought about, is thinking explicitly about partisanship per se. That's something a topic that there are good theoretical reasons actually to studiously avoid that. There are different explanations for the perceptions that people have that are more proximal to the problem, and that's something that we do approach this in a way that focuses on those issues. And so much of what you're raising, which is great, to raise that, actually I think will be addressed in some ways that we can based on the evidence that we have. So I appreciate the spirit of the question.
Yeah, and I agree. We don't want to cast this in partisan context. I think we need to stay above the fray, but we, for better or worse, have been science writ large has clearly been caught in that crossfire. So thanks, Brian. I appreciate that.
Absolutely. So Bev, I'm going to turn to you for any comments you want to make or add.
I had some questions, actually.
Okay, go ahead.
Can we see the slide again? Benjamin, would you mind?
Sure. Yep, I will put it back up.
And I
Right.
apologize up front if I say something that has been said or sounds kind of weird. When I looked at this outline, it says perceptions of scientists, and then it says perceptions of engineers and engineering. We don't want perceptions of scientists and science, or do we not care about the science? So that was one. And then there seems to be, and this is something I don't know if there's anything we can do anything about. I'll point to 3 and say information sources and involvement. You got sources of information about science and engagement with science activities, but apparently we don't have sources of information about engineering. And we also don't engage in engineering activities. So that was kind of just a general question about, and if you hadn't guessed, I'm the engineer in the room.
If we
Not
could have,
the only one.
if we
Not
could
the only one.
brief response, because I've got Dorota and Aaron and also.
I mean, I think it's covered in the first one, general perceptions of science and technology. We do cover science quite a bit throughout, so it's not its own thing. Is that correct, Brian and Benjamin?
Absolutely.
Okay. Yeah. Short and sweet.
And we certainly emphasize engineering and engineers where applicable as well throughout. So that's great. A great suggestion.
Right. I would add just a tiny comment here that I'd like, if we have any information on this, the skilled technical workforce would also be something to consider, since we are increasingly rolling those occupations into the STEM field in a general way. So I'm not sure we have data on this, but I'm going to go to Dorota.
Yes, thank you. I just want to comment on what you proposed. I really, at the moment, I'm new to the committee, as you know, so I'm kind of learning and looking at how we do it and what's the best way to approach this. And Dan, to your comment, can we extend the group of reviewers beyond academics? And my thinking is that one way to really have a different perspective presented during the process of reviewing before we even publish is perhaps include, you mentioned industry. I'd like to throw in economic development organizations. Being from Ohio, which is quickly becoming second Florida, we are looking into explanation of what is the economic impact of the science, engineering, technology, and generally higher education. This might be a way for us to go, include industry, include economic development, and offer their perspective. That's really what I just wanted to comment on. Thank you.
And that was a spirit in which I thought about some state engagement with economic impact. Absolutely.
Absolutely. Excellent suggestions. Aaron?
Thanks, Maureen. Yeah, I'd like to follow up kind of with a corollary to Dan's comments or questions. And it's, it kind of goes along the lines of first remove the plank from your own eye so then you can see clearly to remove the speck from your brother's. And scientists themselves have opinions about themselves as scientists and the public's. And that contributes, of course, to the general perception of science itself. And without kind of a proper, modicum of humility as scientists, I think we do a disservice to science. So I don't know how we capture this, but there's clearly, and it's not spelled out in this in the main topics here, but what are scientists' views of science and the public's perception? And I think as scientists, if you look back at kind of when we've kind of screwed things up, it's because we are a little too arrogant about us knowing better than them.
All right. Suresh Babu.
Thank you, Maureen. I think for the authors of the report, so is there any way we can highlight some of the emerging technologies like large language models? People go to there and then you can ask the same question we are asking in our thematic reports. And then is there any way to highlight what is the impact of that would be, or is it out of scope? I'll stop. Large language models like ChatGPT.
Right.
So I'll stop.
Benjamin, I could offer a quick comment unless you wanted to.
take it away.
Okay. Yeah. So there's always a tension with this report in terms of the balance between the empirical evidence that's available and some of these new topics. That said, we are fortunate. We in the artificial intelligence section, we refer to some extent on polling data that's available. We're hopeful. We're working with one source to have at least some evidence on reference to large language models in that example, and so we may be able to begin to address that, but we probably will end up addressing it in a way that suggests where the avenues are for future research as well, because the timeline is probably such that we aren't going to have a great empirical base for knowing the effects of that per se. But I anticipate that may well be something that in future reports we're able to report on as well. But we are somewhat constrained by the social science evidence that's available, but we are going to at least allude to it. And that phrase is likely to appear in the report based on our latest knowledge of talking with resources.
Excellent. So we're going to hear from Julia and from Mari, and then I think we might have to move on.
Thanks very much. And I'm just expanding a little bit on Bev's comments about the asymmetry in the way science and engineering shows up in the outline. This is a historic issue. We won't get into details, but since this report is being kind of reinvented beginning with the last cycle, I think it's important to continue the movement towards making those more even and more kind of balanced in terms of weight between the two. I know there's some limitation in terms of data sources and the like, but the extent to which that can be done and the extent to which movement can continue to be made in that direction, I think is really important.
Yep, excellent point, Julia. And I'll add my voice for skilled technical workforce. Marvi?
Hi, everyone, and good morning. Well, good morning here in Seattle. I have a few, I guess, maybe not so much questions, but recommendations on the information sources and involvement. The information sources and involvement, to me, sounds like where do we get the data from, right? But there are other influences on how people get the information that goes beyond the sources. And so what I mean by that is I'm thinking about influence of the media and news, right? On the information. So it's like you have the, source of information which you are projecting out, but then how is that information actually transforming as it's being told? And then I know we have to be careful about this, but political PACs, right? What is their influence on like campaigns that are driven by different groups with different interests on the information itself and how it's being communicated? And then finally, and probably is the most important one, is the influence of what I don't know how to like bucket this, but like intelligence-driven data. And what I mean by that is when you go to YouTube and you check on a video, and then YouTube prescribes to you what other videos you want to see, you go into rabbit holes. And so there's a lot of influence on how we consume the media by or what information we get depending on how we consume the media, how we consume that information. And that, whether it is Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, Google search, and now more recently ChatGPT, like all of those are going to basically be transforming that information or driving you into rabbit holes. And so I think that would actually give a lot of a really cool viewpoint on the thematic report.
Right. So I think we do attempt to address this to some extent in the third section with the sources of information. But given that we are getting short on time here, I would like to see if anybody at NCSBS wants to comment on any of these comments or has a response or wants to add anything to our discussion.
So I just to repeat what Maureen said, talking about media sources, that's very much so in line with the third section. A lot of what you're saying about kind of the ways in which it can transform, I think is very interesting. I think some of that can get beyond the scope of what we have access to, but I think it's something very important to keep in mind for the future, definitely. Does anybody else on the team have anything they'd like to add?
You know, the issue of presentation algorithms.
Brian, we can barely hear you.
I'm sorry, can you hear me now? Is that
Yeah,
better?
there you go. Yeah, go ahead.
Oh, I apologize. Yeah, just the issue of presentation algorithms and all of that. There is some new work coming out. We may be able to cite the National Academies of Medicine paper thinking about the influence on highlighting the ways in which we can foreground credible information. Thinking through what the platforms are knowing about algorithms. There are some commentaries that it might make sense to include that as in terms of citations anyway on the general issue. But yes, as Benjamin said, we do deal with different dimensions of mass media and news outlets and all of that quite a bit in that section. So that's a great suggestion.
Thank you. I do not have anything to add. Does anyone from NCSES leadership want to say anything? Okay, I think we're good. Thank you, Maureen.
All right, wonderful, wonderful. So I want to urge everybody to please send your comments on the DNO directly to either me or to Suresh Babu or to Amanda to make sure that they get into the hands of the authors and they have an opportunity to reflect on them and incorporate our suggestions into their revisions. So thanks to everyone. I believe we're ready to vote on this report. As a reminder, only SEP members may vote. Amanda, do we have a quorum?
You do.
Oh, wonderful. Okay, so given that there is a quorum, I would like to ask everyone to please make sure their microphone is not muted. And we're going to take a vote of the SEP committee to approve the narrative outline as amended. For all in favor of approving the narrative outline, please say aye.
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 Any opposed? Any abstentions? Well, thank you then. The narrative outline is approved. Given that we have perhaps just a minute or two before we move on to our second topic, I wanted to ask everyone, or ask if anyone, first off, thank you for your participation in this, but if you feel that there are any outstanding policy relevant or policy outreach ideas that are spurred by this narrative outline that we would like to discuss or that you would like to mention, I think this would be a good time to let us hear about them. I think it's always, we have to be cautious here to not weave policy into the outline, but we are charged to produce policy pieces that as a separate item. And so if there's anything here that we should be thinking about or considering as potential ground for policy, perhaps maybe following up on Marvy's idea about how media is delivered and how it
yes.
might
yeah
be.
That was basically going to be my input. Perhaps to consider, I don't know if this is in work already or if there's something when it comes to policy making that is in work. I mean, you hear about it in the news that people worry about this, how information is presented and how basically the data is, the sources, the data is selected and filtered and then provided to you, right, based on your own likes and so on. How does that affect, I mean, just in general, our democracy, right? But to the point of this thematic report, our perception of science and engineering and technology, it does, we can see it, right? Like it does affect it, but I don't know to what extent, that is, we're like, when do we say we're in crisis, right? What is that threshold, right? Like, what is the threshold of like, when do we say we're in crisis? And what are the potential, from a policymaking perspective, what are the potential policies that we can adapt in order to protect information?
Right.
And of course, we know of the very famous case that was settled yesterday with Dominion and Fox News, right? So it's really relevant in the news, and It could be politically charged, of course, but I mean, if we just think about it from the perception of science and engineering and knowledge, I think it could be very useful.
Yes, I'm going to turn to Mel. Mel, you had your hand
I
up.
just have a short comment. I would be interested in this focused on Americans' attitude. I'm interested in the attitudes of other countries on the same issue.
Huh. That's an excellent point. I'm not sure we have as much information from other countries.
We do put this in international context, and so it's centered around Americans, but there is at least some data from a variety of other countries, and we do include that. So it's a great suggestion. Yeah.
Right. And I think there's also a lot of opportunity for a policy, well, for thinking about policy at the interface between perception and education, since education and science has been a big topic of the board and of this committee for a long while now, and obviously those are related. So, any other thoughts before we move on to the quadrennial review? Well, thank you for this very, very helpful discussion. I'd like to move then to a discussion of the 2023 Quadrennial Science and Technology Review. So this is a new thing. If some of you like me were scratching your head when they first heard about it, it's not you. It's actually a brand new thing that has been mandated by the CHIPS and Science Act for the Office of Science and Technology Policy of the OSTP to complete a review of the science and technology enterprise of the United States every 4 years. So this is going to be something that will, we hope, interface well with indicators and will be informed by input from the board. So the first quadrennial science and technology review is due at the end of this calendar year, so the end of 2023. And OSTP has been directed to consult with the board and to coordinate with other relevant statutorily required reviews, which is likely to include the indicators suite. So I'm actually quite excited about this. I think it's a major opportunity for us and an explicit charge for the NSB to provide recommendations, okay, to go beyond our typical role of providing policy neutral, data-driven information, but to actually go out on a limb a little bit and provide recommendations for the U.S. science and technology enterprise. So we need to think as a committee and also as a full board about key messages and prioritize areas of investment beyond providing the essential data from indicators. I want to go beyond raising alarms based on concerning data that we've all seen and move to identifying priorities and potential interventions that we believe are supported by the data. So a few priorities that I would personally name is the need to address pre-K through 12 STEM education and to strengthen STEM talent in this country across the board, across a broad geography and rural to urban and everywhere else in between. We must continue to welcome international STEM talent and international collaborations, and we urgently need to expand the geography of innovation. So this review is a directive for NSB to provide specific evidence-based and prioritized policy recommendations, not something that we've had much of an opportunity to do in the past. So we need to think at a pretty high level about how we want to approach this opportunity. CHIPS and Science lays out 12 specific content areas for review. In your SEP Diligent book, you should find further background information on the Quadrennial Science and Technology Review. And you'll also find an early stage draft of potential board contributions. So the draft is aligned with the prescribed 12 content areas and is drawn from our indicators and recent board publications. In essence, that background shows you, the board, what we're currently contributing to a consultation with OSTP. So my goals for today, for our discussion today, are a few. To surface what SEP thinks should be the top line board messages in this review, and to identify specific topic areas where we think there are opportunities to strengthen policy recommendations beyond what the board has already contributed. So I'm going to highlight, of the 12 areas, I'm going to highlight a few that I think I'd like to focus our discussion on right now. 4 that are going to be very familiar to, to members of the board, where we've had a particularly strong voice. So the quadrennial review subject number 4, which is addressing global competition in science and technology and identifying potential threats to U.S. leadership. Number 5, which is the STEM workforce, something we've had a lot of input on, but I think this is actually an opportunity for us to make recommendations on strengthening and supporting the workforce. Number 6 is improving regional innovation across the U.S. Again, a very familiar topic to us and one that we may want to make policy recommendations on. And number 11, the infrastructure and tools needed to maintain the U.S. leadership and address societal and national challenges. So that may, in fact, interface a little bit with public perceptions that we've been talking about today. I mean, if we perceive or if we have evidence that there is an issue with public perception, that would be a societal challenge for science and STEM in this country. So ideas for today's committee discussion will feed into a broader board conversation at the May board meeting to identify key messages and areas where we need to say more. So let's kick it off and start by trying to think about top line board messages. You know, one starting place is obviously Vision 2030, which identifies key priorities to deliver benefits from research, develop STEM talent, expand the geography of innovation, foster a global S&E community. So I am not at all surprised to see Julia's hand, and I'm gonna ask her to please have any input she would like to have.
Thank you. Yes, I'm the shy board member. Anyway, so as you were going through that list of 4, Maureen, one thing that really struck me is that at least 3 of them are so dependent on STEM talent, which is also, you know, there are 4 big things in Vision 2030. One is talent. And, you know, if there is one that sort of pokes its head above the others simply because it's foundational to all of them, it is that talent. And so clearly that's something where we have weighed in quite a bit. There is additional work going on, and so we, in that area, I think we can certainly go back to recommendations that we have made and also suggest consideration of expansion. So, for example, we talked about the financial burdens to members of underrepresented populations in pursuing graduate degrees. That is you know, likely extensible to individuals from low SES backgrounds. It also gets at the geographic disparity in terms of access, not only at the graduate level, but elsewhere. And so that is one theme that I think we could work on and have both referring back to things we've already done as well as directions that could go in the future.
I agree. I mean, I think STEM talent is the thread that runs through all of these, and it's something that we've taken up bits and pieces of, and we may take up other bits and pieces in the quadrennial review. One thing I would like to throw out there is, you know, is it reasonable for us to be thinking about not necessarily federally mandated STEM education standards, because I think that's been tried in the past and hasn't worked terribly well, but a federally mandated review on a statewide level, on a state-by-state level, of where do you stand relative to the country, and what are your strengths, what are your weaknesses in terms of STEM education, and come up with a plan. Tell us what you think you can do to address the weaknesses that you see and to maintain and support the strengths that you have. I mean, we have this wonderful state indicators tool, that provides a tremendous amount of information that's readily accessible. I don't know. I think it's something worth thinking about.
So there's that on the one hand. The other is the bully pulpit that the federal government has. And, you know, that was used big time during the Sputnik and the space race. And, you know, there are lots of stories of, you know, kids from, you know, unimaginably poor, challenged backgrounds who got into science and engineering as a result of that. And their lives and the lives of their offspring were changed. It's not, I think, well known that skilled technical workforce jobs in STEM pay well and are more stable than other, you know, other STW types of jobs. And so, you know, the government could do a lot just about publicizing, let alone mandating things. And then, yes, you do need to measure as well.
Yes.
And you know, I picked up on the graduate work, but there are also things in the K-12 area that I think you know, are low-hanging fruit. And you know, ESKI is going to close out pretty soon here, but there's things there. So I'll shut up now.
No, thank you. Feel free to jump in whenever needed, Julia. Suresh Babu.
Thank you, Maureen. I think in the past, Julia and leadership, we have provided a lot of reports with reference to barriers for STEM education for domestic workforce, which is one of the barriers is financial. They cannot get into a STEM because they cannot afford to do that. Also, a specific recommendation we can do in Cardinal is to provide that kind of support for those who need, even if they are not currently in the STEM related jobs, so that they can continually get into the STEM related jobs while they are pursuing the current jobs too. That could be a specific recommendation we can do based on our previous one pages we have created?
No, I think that's an excellent idea too. Does anybody have any thoughts about number 6, improving regional innovation across the U.S. and how that would interface with the REIs and the TIP initiative? Or what we could recommend or ask for. I mean, this is an opportunity for us to actually say, this is what we think needs to happen. Thoughts?
Maureen, I'll pick up on yours. Already you told that to do like a survey, and what do they have, what do they don't have in regional level. That way we can, investment can be strategized on that particular weakness and then get to them to the next level. So it's building on what you said already.
Mm-hmm. Julia?
Yeah, this isn't thought through, but you know, is there some version of the whole land grant university thing that could really jumpstart innovation in regions that have not participated in the past? Similarly, actually getting back to the K-12, is there some incentive for science and math teachers to go to and stay in underserved schools and areas? That, you know, debt relief as just an example, but there might be some things there that, because there's a high correlation between STEM or testing performance in schools and inexperienced teachers that correlates with underserved populations.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think we want to make sure that any recommendations we might offer are within our wheelhouse. I mean, we don't want to abandon the notion of evidence-driven policy recommendations. And I'm not sure the NSB is the best place to surface or to analyze that kind of an idea. But maybe I'm wrong.
Well, except that we do have data from indicators,
yes,
showing very clearly the correlation between underserved populations in, you know, underrepresented groups and low SES and inexperienced teachers.
Yeah, that's very true.
And so, yes, and so going back to data wherever that's possible, I think is really important. I'm done.
Go ahead, Marvi.
One of the things that I see is that some of these, and actually several of these points, they are related to each other, like they're very entangled with each other. So point 6 and point 11, actually, both of those have very good entanglement. And so maybe a way to think about this is, how do we provide policy awareness or policy recommendations that actually combine, this, kind of like together into maybe 1 or 2 recommendations that address more than just one point. That's one of the comments that I had. And specifically on number 6, I was thinking that I believe that there's a lack of awareness of understanding that goods are not made equal, and that if you are actually pushing for manufacturing, or if you're pushing for informatics, or if you're pushing for agriculture, right? Like the values of the goods are not equal, and macroeconomically, they actually don't provide the same value to the economy in the U.S. And so what I mean by that is that sometimes regionally, politicians, governors and so on, their senators too, they're very worried about bringing jobs, right? But not all jobs are made equal. And here's where science and technology makes a big difference. And to one of the points made before, we know that, people with science and technology jobs tend to have more stable lives, and so on. But there's a reason for that, and that's because what you're producing is actually more valuable macroeconomically, right, in trades and so on. So one of the first things that I think we should point out in when we put out recommendations is maybe providing awareness of what is the tier structure of what brings more value economically to the economy of the US. And there's a lot of macroeconomic articles on that. And then with that, understand not just to Babu's point, to the idea of if you bring to your region, right, jobs, it's not just to bring, what you're weak on or what your gaps are, but what also bringing what it's more valuable. Right. So not just, manufacturing, but no, actually, maybe you ought to be having capabilities in data analytics in your region. Right. And that would actually pay even better than some of the jobs in manufacturing.
Yes, very, very true. So I like the idea of weaving together these very interrelated themes. And I think the very first, if you look at the asks from the quadrennial review, the very first one is to do exactly that. What are the high prioritized? And I think if we spent our time there, crafting something along the lines of what Marvi is saying, these are how the topics interweave, and these are what we think are the highest priority recommendations. The rest of it's going to fall out of that. Wanda?
Thank you, Maureen. I'd like to comment on a couple of points that Julia raised, both of which I strongly agree with. One pertains to the workforce, and I was actually thinking a strength in our approach to the workforce is that we seem to be thinking broadly about it. That is, specifically, we're thinking about graduate education towards doctorate production. We're thinking about technological education. We could perhaps more explicitly add to this workforce portfolio, if you will, the instructional workforce. And that ties very closely to the work of ASCII. And it falls very nicely within NSF's established leadership roles. We don't spend the most money in education, but the roles that we have are game changers in many regards. And so I think we strengthen our workforce portfolio by expanding to include instructional workforce along with areas like technological education, and of course the PhD GRF conversation that we're having. The second point pertains to Julia's suggestion about optimizing the role of land grant colleges and universities, in addition to it adding strength to innovation hubs, regional hubs of innovation, if you will. We also have a nice niche in that there is statutory language with regard to the establishment of predominantly Black institutions, for example, during the land grant establishment period. So that ties us directly into Vision 2030, and in particular to the missing millions from an institutional capability, that is looking at MSIs broadly. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Wanda. I love.
Did we lose Maureen?
We lost you, Maureen.
Okay, I think I'm back.
I can.
Yeah, we can hear you now, Maureen. We lost you
Yeah.
for 30 seconds.
I went into freeze mode for a few seconds there. No, I love the idea of the instructional workforce as being part of the overall science and technology enterprise, because it has been something that's been very artificially separated from the whole STEM talent question. And I'm not sure exactly how it is that could be folded in, but do others have any thoughts on this? How the instructional workforce can become kind of a third leg, or maybe a fourth leg, the academic research, the research done by industry, the skilled technical workforce, and the instructional workforce.
Well, it ties very nicely, I think. It benefits from the current work of ESCE.
Right.
And NSF has an established directorate, education directorate, in which for decades, the instructional workforce from the R&D perspective has long been addressed. So it really fits neatly. It's well aligned with what we've done historically, and it fits nicely, I believe, with what is being brought to bear through the ESCE committee.
Suresh Babu?
Maureen, one of the things I'm going to build on the geography of innovation. So one of the feedback which we have been receiving many times is that we have to take the STEM education with context to where the people are and not expect them to travel to a place. So is there any way we can provide that kind of flexible education, STEM education and training? This could be part of our the projection in the coming years. I'll stop.
I think that's a lovely idea. I've wanted to have like STEM education TED Talks for a long time. Something that could be taken on the road as a program for people who don't have the resources or the inclination to leave home, pack up, and spend thousands of dollars to get educated on STEM topics. Julia?
Yeah, I just real quickly playing off of what Wanda just said, which I think is absolutely terrific. The instructional workforce is, if you think of it in some way, it's really fits in infrastructure. The infrastructure is all that stuff you need to be able to do the science and technology and economic competitiveness and so forth. And so, I mean, that's not meant in any kind of pejorative way, but when you think of all of those foundational things without which you can't get to the end product, it's clearly there and front and center.
Absolutely. I absolutely agree. Any other thoughts or comments as we're heading towards the top of the hour?
Maureen, the citizen science is called out all over in quadrennial also. If we can scale that also, that would be really helpful.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Well, I am going to urge all of you to please look at the materials that are in the board book. and really before the meeting, let's do some high level thinking about this. Perhaps focus on that very first question that is mandated in the quadrennial review of what are the priorities, what are the front burner boiling over kinds of issues we need to be thinking about, and see if you can come up with your own personal list. This is what, if I was given 5 asks of leadership in this country, what would I ask them? Because we are being given that opportunity. And, they may not listen to us, but it's wonderful to have a place at the table to give and ask, right? So please let's do that. I'm going to open up one last window for anybody who has something they want to add or say or leave the rest of the group with.
I'm going to call my own brainstorming session, be president for a day.
That's right. That's brilliant. Yep.
I
Right.
would just briefly tag on to Babu's statement about citizen science, and I don't have the outline before us, but the perceptions, the thematic report that we just went through, the key to citizen science is that it actively involves the citizen in creating, producing, or reacting to. In other words, they have an active role. And I just wonder if our NSF colleagues can take a look and see whether there is an appropriate role in which this idea that Babu put forward might fit in a value-added way.
Kivan, or actually I'm gonna turn to Carol because it looks like she's being responsive to Wanda's comment.
Yes, here. Yeah, on the point about citizen science, in the invention, knowledge transfer, and innovation thematic report, we do cover, or we did in 2022, citizen science from the perspective of the federal agencies that were engaged in that. And we will do that again in 2024. But I want to tell everyone that in the past 2 years, what I've been hearing is that the word citizen science can be a little triggering because the idea is maybe it leaves out part of the population who are not citizens. And so one of the terminologies that I have been thinking about has been public involvement. Apparently community science is not right because that's more group driven, but I just wanted to share that language with y'all.
Okay, Kivan, you have 1 minute.
Well, thank you. I wasn't going to bring this up, but only because there is a minute. Item number 12, currently there's not really a response there. I wonder, we have the NSB report on funding of major facilities, and that report, specifically talks thoughtfully about the potential for creative uses of the MREFC account to deal with challenges around really enabling robust research with the facilities that we develop. Is that too parochial, or might that be something that we can amplify in that item number 12?
I think it could be amplified. Yeah, I mean, not sure exactly how, but any thoughts that you might have on this would be more than welcome.
What I guess rather than saying nothing there, currently item number 12 says we don't really have anything to say. NSB went to some effort to write that report, and it seems to me that we could extract a couple of bullet points that, sort of the high level recommendations and summarize.
Well, this is just a draft. So it's by no means a finished document. It's some initial thoughts. So any thoughts you want to add to it would be wonderful.
What would be the way to do that?
I think about them, bring them forward at the board meeting, and or email them to myself or to Suresh or to Amanda. Great. And they will definitely be incorporated.
Thank you.
All right. So thank you all for this excellent set of discussions. We are going to conclude our business for today, and the meeting is adjourned at, well, I have 12:01, but it's actually probably